Hello, and welcome to Whispers in the Canvas, the channel where art and darkness collide. We delve into the stories that hide behind the brushstrokes, the tales of passion, obsession, and sometimes even murder that are immortalized in the world's most famous and infamous works of art. The story we are about to share with you is a particularly chilling one. It's a tale of a love so profound it became a poison, of a genius so consumed by his muse that he chose to capture her essence not just in paint, but in death. It is the story of a painter who murdered his lover and then, in an act of breathtaking arrogance and desperate confession, exhibited her portrait to the world. This is a journey into the heart of a tormented artist, a descent into a world where beauty and brutality are inextricably intertwined. Before we begin, if you are a connoisseur of the macabre, a lover of stories that linger in your thoughts long after they are told, then I invite you to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for notifications. You won't want to miss the dark and fascinating tales we have in store for you. Now settle in and let us begin the story of the Crimson Muse. The first time I laid eyes on Isabella, it was as if the world, which I had previously perceived as a muted symphony of grays and browns, had suddenly and violently exploded into a riot of color. She was a living, breathing masterpiece, standing across the sterile, white-walled gallery, a splash of vibrant crimson in a sea of monochrome pretension. She wore a simple red dress, but on her, it was not merely an article of clothing. It was a declaration, a bold and defiant statement. It clung to her form like a second skin, a vibrant testament to the fiery life that pulsed beneath its fabric. Her hair, a tumultuous cascade of raven curls, framed a face that seemed to have been sculpted by a deity with a penchant for the dramatic high, sharp cheekbones, a defiant, almost arrogant chin, and eyes the color of a stormy, turbulent sea. In that moment, surrounded by what the world had deemed the masterpieces of my contemporaries, she was the only work of art that held any meaning, the only creation I could truly see. I was at a juncture in my career where the world was, for all intents and purposes, my oyster. The critics, in their infinite and often misguided wisdom, lauded my work. Collectors, with more money than taste, clamored for a piece of my soul to hang on their walls. My name, Julian Croft, was whispered in the hallowed, hushed halls of galleries in the same reverent breath as the modern masters. Yet, despite the accolades and the ever-growing fortune, I felt a gnawing, cavernous emptiness, a creative abyss that no amount of praise or financial success could ever hope to fill. My paintings, though technically proficient and lauded for their precision, lacked a certain fire. They were soulless. I was a craftsman, a skilled and meticulous technician with a brush, but I was not yet an artist in the truest, most profound sense of the word. I was desperately, silently, searching for a muse, for a spark to ignite the dormant volcano of creativity that I knew lay dormant within me. And then, as if summoned by the sheer force of my longing, there she was. Our introduction was a clumsy affair, orchestrated by a fawning, sycophantic gallery owner, a man whose artistic sensibilities were as shallow as his pockets were deep. He prattled on endlessly about my latest collection, a series of stark, cold, architectural landscapes that had garnered significant critical acclaim but left me feeling hollow. My eyes, however, my entire being, were fixated on her. She listened to his rambling with a polite, almost bored expression, her stormy eyes occasionally flitting towards me, a flicker of something unreadable, something challenging, in their depths. Isabella is a poet, the gallery owner announced with a flourish, as if he were presenting a rare and exotic specimen he had discovered himself. A poet, I echoed, the word itself seeming to hold a new and profound weight. I was intrigued. Of sorts, she interjected, her voice a low, melodic hum that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I arrange words. You arrange colors. We're both in the business of creating illusions, of telling beautiful lies, are we not, Mr. Croft? Her directness, her lack of pretense, was a breath of fresh, invigorating air in the stuffy, pretentious world I had come to inhabit. There was a raw, untamed, almost feral quality to her, a stark and captivating contrast to the polished and meticulously curated personas of the art world's elite. We spent the remainder of that evening locked in a conversation that was as intoxicating and dizzying as the vintage champagne being so generously served. We spoke of art, of life, of the inherent darkness that lurks just beneath the shimmering surface of beauty. She possessed an uncanny ability to see past the celebrated artist, the public figure, and glimpse the tormented, lonely soul that resided within. And I, in turn, saw in her a kindred spirit, a fellow traveler in the shadowy, melancholic landscapes of human emotion. Our courtship was a whirlwind, a passionate and all-consuming affair that set my world, and my art, on fire. Isabella became not just my lover, but my muse, my obsession, my very reason for being. She moved into my sprawling, minimalist loft, a space that had once felt as cold and empty as my canvases, but was now filled with the warmth of her laughter, the echo of her music, and the intoxicating, ever-present scent of her perfume. She was a chaotic and beautiful storm, and I, a ship that had been hopelessly lost at sea, had finally found my anchor. Our days became a blur of creative, almost manic, fervor. I would paint for hours, sometimes days on end, fueled by a wellspring of inspiration I had never known before. Isabella would often sit in the studio, a silent, watchful presence, or read aloud from her latest work, her voice a soothing, melodic balm to my often tortured soul. Her poetry was like her raw, passionate, and brutally, unflinchingly honest. It spoke of love and of loss, of beauty and of decay, of the razor-thin line that separates exquisite pleasure from unbearable pain. Her words became the soundtrack to my art, weaving themselves into the very fabric of my canvases. Her verses a silent collaboration with my brushstrokes. My art underwent a profound and dramatic transformation. The stark, sterile landscapes that had defined my early career gave way to vibrant, emotional portraits. And my soul, my only subject, was Isabella. I painted her in every mood, in every light, in every conceivable pose. Each portrait was a love letter, a desperate, obsessive attempt to capture the multifaceted, ever-changing jewel that she was. The world, as it often does, took notice. The critics, who had once praised my technical skill with a detached, academic air, were now in awe of the raw, untamed emotion that seemed to bleed from my canvases. They called it a new era for Julian Croft, a renaissance of the soul. My Isabella portraits sold for astronomical, almost obscene sums, cementing my status as one of the most important artists of my generation. We were the art world's golden couple, the enigmatic, brooding painter and his ethereal, otherworldly muse. Our love story became a modern-day myth, a tale of all-consuming passion and divine inspiration that captivated the public's imagination. But beneath the gilded, shimmering surface of our perfect life, a darkness was beginning to fester and grow. The same all-consuming passion that fueled our creative endeavors also ignited the destructive flames of a suffocating jealousy. My love for Isabella was not a gentle, nurturing flame. It was a possessive, all-consuming fire. I wanted to own every part of her, to be the sole recipient of her light, her laughter, her very thoughts. The idea of her existing in a world that did not revolve entirely and exclusively around me was a torment, a constant gnawing pain in the pit of my stomach. Her past was a source of both constant fascination and gnawing, relentless insecurity for me. She spoke of it in vague, poetic, and frustratingly elusive terms, of a life lived on the fringes, of lovers who had come and gone like ships in the night. These faceless, nameless men from her past became ghosts that haunted my imagination, spectral rivals I could never hope to vanquish. I would imagine them touching her, kissing her, possessing a part of her that I, in my desperation, never could. The rational part of my mind, the part that still clung to sanity, knew that this was a madness born of my own deep-seated insecurities, but the artist in me, the part that thrived on a diet of intense, often painful emotion, reveled in the exquisite, almost masochistic pain of it. The arguments began as minor skirmishes, petty disagreements over trivial, meaningless matters. But they soon escalated into full-blown wars, fueled by copious amounts of expensive scotch and my ever-growing, unchecked paranoia. Accusations, both spoken and unspoken, hung in the air between us like a thick, suffocating fog. I would accuse her of infidelity, of seeking inspiration in the arms of other, lesser men. She, in turn, would counter with accusations of my suffocating possessiveness, of my inability to see her as anything more than a beautiful, inanimate object to be captured and immortalized on canvas. "You don't love me, Julian," she would scream, her voice hoarse with a heartbreaking mixture of anger and despair. "You love the idea of me. You love the way I look on your canvases, the way my name sounds when it's whispered by your adoring, sycophantic critics. But you don't love me, the real me, the flawed, the broken, and the imperfect me." Her words were like daggers to my heart, not because they were untrue, but because they held a painful, undeniable kernel of truth. I was an artist first and a man second. I saw the world, and everyone and everything in it, as a potential subject for my next masterpiece. And Isabella, with her captivating, almost painful beauty and a soul that seemed to perpetually dance on the edge of a razor blade, was the ultimate subject. Our lovemaking, once a tender and passionate expression of our connection, became a desperate, almost violent, attempt to bridge the ever-widening, ever-deepening chasm between us. It was a clash of bodies and souls, a frantic, almost primal, search for a connection that was slowly but surely slipping through our fingers. In those moments of raw, unbridled passion, the arguments and accusations would momentarily melt away, replaced by a temporary, fragile illusion of unity. But as the sweat cooled on our skin and the harsh, unforgiving reality of our fractured love seeped back into the room, the emptiness would return, more profound and more painful than before. I began to see a change in Isabella, a slow and tragic erosion of the vibrant spirit that had so captivated me. The fiery, passionate woman who had burst into my life like a supernova was slowly being extinguished, like a candle in a harsh, unforgiving wind. Her laughter, once a constant, joyous melody in our home, became a rare and precious commodity. Her eyes, once a stormy sea of passion and defiance, were now often vacant, lost in a distant, private world of her own making. She started spending more and more time away from the studio, seeking solace in the company of friends I had never met, in quiet, unassuming places where I was not welcome. My paranoia reached a fever pitch, a deafening crescendo of suspicion and fear. I did something I am not proud of, something that marked the beginning of the end. I hired a private investigator to follow her, a seedy, pathetic little man with a perpetually greasy comb-over and a soul that had been irrevocably stained by the sordid secrets of others. His daily reports were a dose of poison I willingly, eagerly, administered to myself, each one feeding the insatiable, ravenous beast of my jealousy. He would detail her meetings with old friends, her long, solitary walks in the park, her quiet, contemplative visits to out-of-the-way cafes. There was no evidence of infidelity, no clandestine lovers lurking in the shadows. But in my twisted, paranoid mind, every innocent gesture, every friendly conversation, was a profound and unforgivable betrayal. The final, fatal argument was a masterpiece of cruelty, a symphony of every discordant note that had come to define our relationship. It was a cold, rainy November night, the kind of night that seeps into your bones and chills you to the very core. Isabella had come home late, her clothes soaked through, her face pale and drawn. She had been to see an old friend, a fellow poet who was passing through town. It was an innocent enough explanation, a perfectly plausible reason for her tardiness. But in my mind, it was a lie, a carefully constructed and flimsy alibi to conceal a clandestine, passionate tryst. I confronted her, the private investigator's report clutched in my hand like a weapon, its flimsy pages a testament to my madness. The words that poured from my mouth were a torrent of pure, unadulterated venom, a vile and hateful concoction of accusations, insults, and thinly veiled threats. I dredged up every insecurity, every fear, every dark and twisted thought that had been festering in the darkest corners of my mind for months. I wanted to hurt her, to break her, to make her feel even a fraction of the agonizing pain that was consuming me. Isabella listened in a profound and heartbreaking silence, her face a mask of weary, soul-crushing resignation. When I had finally exhausted myself, when the last of my venom had been spent and I was left panting and hollow, she looked at me, her beautiful, stormy eyes filled with a profound and bottomless sadness. "I'm leaving you, Julian," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a fragile sound that was almost lost in the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live in this beautiful, gilded cage you've built for me. I need to be free." Her words were the final, fatal blow. The thought of a world without her, of my canvases without her face, of my life without her presence, was a prospect more terrifying, more unbearable than death itself. In that singular, terrible moment, a cold, chilling clarity washed over me, a terrifying sense of purpose. If I couldn't have her, no one could. I don't remember reaching for the palette knife, its familiar weight a cold comfort in my hand. I don't remember the feel of the cold, hard steel as I lunged towards her. But I remember the look in her eyes. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was a look of profound and utter pity. And then there was crimson, a vibrant, beautiful, horrifying crimson, the color of the dress she had worn the first time I saw her, the color of our love, the color of my muse. The silence that descended upon the studio in the immediate aftermath of the act was a living, breathing entity. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered all sound, all thought, all reason. The rhythmic, almost hypnotic patter of the rain against the large, floor-to-ceiling windows, which had earlier served as a dramatic and fitting backdrop to our final tragic opera, now seemed to mock the profound and deathly stillness within. The only sound in that vast, cavernous space was the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart, a wild, primitive drumbeat against the canvas of my ribs. Isabella lay on the floor, a broken, discarded doll in a rapidly expanding pool of crimson. Her magnificent raven curls, once so full of life and defiance, were now matted with a substance that was both beautiful and grotesque in its shocking vibrancy. Her stormy eyes, the eyes that had once held entire galaxies of emotion, of passion, of intelligence, were now vacant, staring unseeingly at the high, unforgiving ceiling. The red dress, the very same one that had been a beacon of light in a crowded, soulless gallery, was now a shroud, its color almost indistinguishable from the lifeblood that seeped into the polished, dark-stained wooden floorboards. My first instinct, strangely, was not one of remorse or even of fear. It was a purely artistic instinct. The scene before me was a masterpiece of macabre, terrible beauty. The interplay of the soft, ambient light and the deep, encroaching shadows, the stark, shocking contrast of her pale, porcelain skin against the deep, rich crimson, the tragic, undeniable poetry of her lifeless, broken form. It was a composition that would have made Caravaggio weep with envy. A wave of creative energy, a perverse and twisted form of inspiration, surged through me with an almost electric force. My hands, still trembling from the act of violence, now itched with a desperate, undeniable urgency to hold a brush, to capture this fleeting, horrific moment of terrible beauty. But then, as quickly as it had come, the artistic trance was shattered, and the cold, hard reality of what I had done crashed down upon me like a tidal wave. I had not just destroyed a life, I had destroyed my own. I had brutally, irrevocably, extinguished the very flame that had ignited my art, the muse that had given my life, my work, its meaning. A wave of nausea, so powerful and overwhelming that it buckled my knees, washed over me. I stumbled, almost crawled, to the bathroom, my body convulsing as I retched violently into the pristine white porcelain of the toilet bowl. But there was nothing to bring up, only the bitter, acidic taste of bile and soul-crushing regret. The hours that followed were a blur of panicked, frenetic activity, a frantic and clumsy, almost farcical, attempt to erase the evidence of my unforgivable crime. I was a man possessed, driven by a primal, animalistic fear of discovery. I wrapped Isabella's body in a large, unused canvas, a macabre and deeply ironic final resting place for my muse. The act was both a desecration and a form of perverse, twisted reverence. She had been my art in life, and now, in death, she was one with it. The sprawling, indifferent city became my unwitting accomplice in the disposal of her body. Under the concealing cloak of darkness, I carried her to my car, a dead weight that seemed to grow heavier, more burdensome, with each and every step. I drove for hours, the city lights a meaningless, kaleidoscopic blur of neon and indifference. I eventually found a secluded spot, a forgotten, desolate stretch of wilderness on the outskirts of the city, a place where secrets could be buried and, hopefully, forgotten. The earth was cold and unforgiving, and the act of digging her grave with my bare, blood-stained hands was a form of brutal self-flagellation. Each shovelful of dirt was a penance, a futile and desperate attempt to bury my guilt along with her beautiful, broken body. I returned to the studio as the first, faint hints of dawn were beginning to paint the eastern sky in delicate, mocking shades of gray and pink. The silence was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer a suffocating blanket, but a hollow, echoing void. The absence of Isabella was a palpable, physical presence, a gaping, bleeding wound in the very fabric of my reality. The faint, sweet scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, a ghostly, tormenting reminder of the life that had been so brutally, so senselessly, extinguished. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing descent into a private hell of my own making. I became a ghost in my own life, a hollowed-out, empty shell of the man I once was. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just drank. The expensive, single-malt scotch that had once been a symbol of my success was now my only solace, a temporary, fleeting anesthetic for a pain that was too profound, too all-consuming, to bear. The art world, blissfully and callously oblivious to the unspeakable tragedy that had unfolded in the hallowed halls of my studio, continued to turn on its self-important axis. The gallery owner, the same man who had, with such fateful consequences, introduced me to Isabella, called incessantly, his voice a grating, unbearable mixture of sycophantic praise and thinly veiled impatience. He wanted to know about my new work, about the next collection of Isabella portraits that would undoubtedly sell for a fortune. "The world is waiting, Julian," he would say, his voice oozing with a false, cloying sincerity that made my stomach churn. "They are clamoring for more of your muse." His words were a cruel and ironic twist of the knife in a wound that would never heal. My muse was gone, buried in a shallow, unmarked grave on the desolate outskirts of the city. And I, her creator and her destroyer, was left with nothing but the cold, dead ashes of our love and the indelible stain of blood on my hands. It was during one of these long, drunken, sleepless nights that the idea, in all its terrible and brilliant glory, came to me. I would paint her one last time. I would create a final, definitive masterpiece, a testament to our tragic love and a silent, public confession of my crime. It would be my penance, my absolution, and my ultimate, defiant act of artistic creation. The decision, once made, was like a jolt of electricity to my dormant, lifeless soul. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of purpose, a reason to get out of the bed that had become my tomb. I stumbled into the studio, the familiar, comforting scent of turpentine and oil paint a welcome and grounding assault on my senses. The studio, which had been a crime scene, a place of horror, was now a sanctuary once more. I stretched a large canvas, the largest I had ever worked on, its pristine white surface a daunting and terrifying prospect. It was a blank slate, a mirror that I knew would reflect the profound and unredeemable ugliness of my soul. I began to paint with a feverish, almost manic intensity, a man possessed by a demon of his own making. I didn't work from a photograph or a preparatory sketch. I worked from memory, from the image of Isabella that was seared, burned, into my brain, an image that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. The painting was a radical departure from my previous work. The vibrant, life-affirming colors that had once defined my Isabella portraits were gone, replaced by a somber and muted palette of grays, blacks, and deep, bruised purples. The only splash of color was a single, defiant, almost violent streak of crimson, a color that was both a celebration of her life and a chilling confession of her death. I painted her not as the vibrant, laughing muse that the world had come to know and love, but as the broken, tragic figure she had become in her final, terrifying moments. I painted the profound sadness in her eyes, the weary, soul-crushing resignation on her face, the almost imperceptible hint of pity in her final, forgiving gaze. I painted the entire story of our love, of its passionate, sun-drenched beginnings and its violent, tragic, rain-soaked end. The process of creating the painting was both an exquisite torture and a form of cathartic therapy. Each and every brushstroke was a confession, a whispered secret between me and the canvas. I relived every moment of our love, every argument, every kiss, every tear. I poured all of my guilt, all of my grief, and all of my twisted, possessive love onto the canvas. The painting became a living, breathing entity, a vessel for all the unspoken words, all the unresolved emotions, all the darkness that had ultimately consumed us both. I worked for weeks on end, a blur of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled days, driven by a cocktail of alcohol and a self-destructive, almost suicidal, desire to create. I lost all track of time, the days and nights bleeding into one another in a meaningless, monotonous cycle. The world outside the studio walls ceased to exist. My only reality was the canvas, the paint, and the ever-present ghost of the woman I had both loved and destroyed. As the painting neared its completion, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was my masterpiece. It was the most honest, the most raw, the most powerful work I had ever created. It was a painting that would not just be seen but felt. It was a painting that would tell a story that only I knew the terrible, bloody ending to. The final touch was a single, defiant brushstroke of crimson on her lips, a final, bloody kiss. It was a mark of ownership, a final, desperate declaration that she was mine in life and now in death. When the painting was finally finished, I stepped back to look at my creation. The silence in the studio was different now. It was no longer a void, but a presence. The painting had a voice, a silent, piercing scream that echoed in the emptiness of the room. It was a confession, a silent testament to the terrible and beautiful thing I had done. The gallery owner came to see the painting, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and profound unease. He walked around it, his expensive leather shoes echoing in the cavernous space. He didn't speak for a long time, his gaze locked on the tragic, haunting figure of Isabella. "It's magnificent," he finally breathed, his voice a hushed, reverent whisper. "But it's so dark, so different from your other work." "It's the truth," I replied, my voice a hollow, broken echo of its former self. "The truth?" he asked, a quizzical, uncomprehending look on his face. "It's the final chapter," I said, my gaze fixed on the painting on her eyes. "The end of the story." He didn't understand, of course. He couldn't. He saw a brilliant, albeit disturbing, work of art. He saw the next sensation, the next sold-out exhibition. He didn't see the confession. He didn't see the blood. We decided to call it The Crimson Muse. A fitting title, I thought. A tribute to the woman who had been both my greatest inspiration and my ultimate downfall. The exhibition was set for a month's time. The centerpiece, the main attraction, would be my silent confession to the world. And I, the artist, the murderer, the creator of this terrible, tragic beauty, would be there to watch as the world unknowingly bore witness to my crime. The thought filled me with a perverse and thrilling sense of anticipation. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise on the final act of my tragic play, and I couldn't wait for the world to see what I had done. The night of the exhibition was a spectacle of manufactured glamour, a carefully orchestrated and hollow performance for the city's cultural and financial elite. The gallery, a cavernous white space that usually felt sterile and impersonal, was tonight transformed into a buzzing, vibrant hive of champagne-sipping socialites, sycophantic art critics, and wealthy, predatory collectors, all eager to devour the latest offering from the celebrated, enigmatic Julian Croft. They moved through the rooms with a practiced, languid grace, their voices a low, reverent hum, their eyes scanning the walls adorned with the ghosts of my past, the vibrant, joyful portraits of Isabella that had once defined my career and our love. These earlier works served as the opening act, a nostalgic and poignant prelude to the main event that awaited them in the final, secluded chamber. I stood in the shadows, a ghost at my own feast, observing the scene with a detached, almost out-of-body sensation. Dressed in a tailored black suit that felt more like a costume than my own skin, I was playing the part of the celebrated artist, the tormented, misunderstood genius. I accepted their fawning, empty compliments with a tight-lipped, humorless smile and a vacant, dismissive nod, my mind a million miles away, lost in the echoing, deafening silence of the studio where my masterpiece, my confession, awaited its audience. The scotch in my hand, its amber liquid of familiar comfort, was my only anchor to reality, its fiery burn a welcome distraction from the cold, hard knot of dread and perverse anticipation that was tightening in the pit of my stomach. The gallery owner, a man whose ambition was as polished and shiny as his expensive Italian shoes, flitted about the room like a well-dressed hummingbird, his voice a constant, cloying stream of hyperbole. A new direction for Croft, he'd gush to a potential buyer, his eyes gleaming with the promise of a hefty commission, a raw, visceral, and unflinching exploration of the human condition. He was selling a product, a narrative, a carefully crafted story, blissfully unaware of the horrific, bloody truth that lay just beneath the layers of oil and pigment. Finally, the moment arrived. With a theatrical flourish that was entirely his own, the owner announced the unveiling of my latest and final portrait of Isabella. A hush, a palpable wave of silence, fell over the crowd as they were ushered towards the closed doors of the final gallery. It felt like a funeral procession, a slow, somber march towards a final, terrible revelation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, chaotic drum solo in the otherwise silent symphony of my own undoing. As the heavy doors swung open, a collective gasp, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, rippled through the room. There it was, the Crimson Muse. It dominated the space, a monolithic, brooding presence that seemed to suck all the light and air from the room. The silence that followed was profound, a stark and jarring contrast to the earlier buzz of conversation. It was a silence born not of indifference, but of shock, of a deep, unsettling, and visceral resonance. The painting was everything I had intended it to be, beautiful, tragic, and deeply, profoundly disturbing. It was a visceral punch to the gut, an assault on the senses. The Isabella on this canvas was not the ethereal, smiling muse they had come to adore. This was a fallen angel, a woman on the precipice of despair, her soul laid bare for all to see. I had captured the weariness in her posture, the profound, bottomless sadness in her stormy eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor on her crimson-stained lips. The muted, bruised palette gave the painting a funereal, almost ghostly, quality, a palpable sense of irreparable loss. And then there was the single, defiant streak of red. It drew the eye, a vibrant, bleeding wound on the somber, melancholic canvas. To the unsuspecting viewer, it was a bold, brilliant artistic choice. To me, it was the blood on my hands, the eternal, unforgivable stain on my soul. I watched their faces, my eyes darting from one to another, searching desperately for a sign of recognition, a flicker of understanding. The critics stood clustered together, their brows furrowed in intense concentration, whispering in hushed, academic tones. They spoke of chiaroscuro, of emotional depth, of a brutal honesty that was both captivating and repellent. They saw the art, but they were blind to the confession. The collectors, their cold, calculating eyes assessing the painting's potential for appreciation, saw a commodity. They saw a pivotal, groundbreaking piece in the Julian Croft oeuvre, a guaranteed and substantial return on their investment. The socialites, their faces a mask of feigned intellectual curiosity, saw a new and exciting topic for their vapid dinner party conversations. But then I saw her, a young woman standing at the edge of the crowd, her face pale, her eyes wide with a look of dawning, unmistakable horror. She wasn't a critic or a collector. She was a poet, a friend of Isabella's from her life before me. She had been at the apartment once, a fleeting, almost forgotten visitor from a world I had tried so desperately, so violently to erase. Our eyes met across the crowded, silent room, and in that singular, heart-stopping moment, I knew she saw it. She saw past the masterful brushstrokes, past the critical acclaim, past the polite, appreciative murmurs of the crowd. She saw the truth. A single silent tear traced a path down her pale cheek, a silent accusation that was louder, more damning, than any spoken word. Her reaction was the first tiny crack in the carefully constructed, fragile facade of my new reality. The seed of doubt had been planted. The silent confession had found its first listener. In the days that followed, the painting became a sensation. The art world was abuzz with talk of the Crimson Muse. The critics wrote lengthy, glowing, and entirely misguided reviews, praising its raw emotional power and its courageous departure from my previous, more romanticized, work. They hailed it as a masterpiece of modern portraiture, a testament to my unparalleled genius. The irony was a bitter, acidic pill to swallow. I was being celebrated for the very act that should have, by all rights, damned me for eternity. But the poet, Isabella's friend, had not remained silent. She had gone to the police. Her concerns, initially dismissed as the overwrought, hysterical imaginings of a grieving friend, began to gain traction. Isabella had been missing for weeks. My explanation, that she had left me, that she needed space to find herself, had been accepted without question. We were artists, after all, prone to dramatic and unpredictable behavior. But now, with the poet's persistent and unwavering testimony, my story, my carefully constructed lie, began to unravel. The police opened a missing persons investigation. 2 detectives, a man and a woman, came to my studio. They were a study in contrasts. The man, a world-weary veteran with a crumpled suit and a cynical, tired gaze, was all business. The woman, younger, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me, right into the darkest corners of my soul, was the one I feared. They asked me about Isabella, about our relationship, about the night she disappeared. I repeated my well-rehearsed story, my voice a carefully modulated performance of a heartbroken, abandoned lover. I was the tormented artist, forsaken by his fickle muse. I showed them her empty closets, the note I had so clumsily forged, a melodramatic, almost comical, farewell that now seemed laughably amateurish. They asked to see the painting. I led them to the gallery, now a silent, empty shrine to my crime. They stood before the Crimson Muse for a long, uncomfortable time, their faces unreadable, their silence more unnerving than any accusation. "It's a powerful piece," the female detective said, her voice soft but laced with an undercurrent of steel. "You must have loved her very much." "She was my everything," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Her friend," she continued, her eyes never leaving the painting, never leaving Isabella's haunting gaze. She said this is not the Isabella she knew. She said you've captured something else. Something violent. "Grief is a violent emotion, detective," I said, my voice dripping with the faux artistic pretension I had perfected over the years. But the seed of suspicion had taken root and was beginning to grow. They began to dig deeper into my life, into our life together. They interviewed our friends, the gallery owner, the staff at our favorite restaurants. A picture began to emerge, a picture of a passionate but volatile relationship, of my suffocating possessiveness, my insane jealousy, my increasingly erratic and unpredictable behavior. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected and unwelcome source. The private investigator, the seedy, pathetic little man who had so eagerly fueled my paranoia, had kept meticulous, detailed records. His reports, initially intended to expose Isabella's non-existent infidelity, now became a damning timeline of my descent into madness. The final report, detailing her innocent meeting with her poet friend on the very night she disappeared, was a final, irrefutable indictment of my lies. The detectives returned to my studio, their faces grim and determined. This time they had a warrant. The forensic team swarmed the space, their methodical and impersonal search a brutal violation of my sanctuary. They found what they were looking for: a single microscopic drop of blood, overlooked in my frantic, panicked cleanup, that had seeped between the floorboards. DNA testing confirmed what they and I already suspected. It was Isabella's. The arrest was a quiet, almost anticlimactic affair. There was no struggle, no denial. The game was over. As they led me away in handcuffs, my gaze fell one last time upon the portrait of Isabella, her sad, knowing eyes seeming to follow me, a final, silent farewell. My silent confession had finally been heard. The trial was a media circus, a grotesque spectacle that fed the public's insatiable appetite for a story of love, obsession, and murder among the rich and famous. I was no longer Julian Croft, the celebrated artist. I was the painter of death, the Crimson Killer. My art, once celebrated for its emotional depth, was now re-examined through the dark, distorted lens of my crime. The critics, who had once praised my genius, now spoke of a pathological obsession, a narcissistic rage that had been hiding in plain sight on my canvases all along. The Crimson Muse, my silent confession, was the prosecution's star witness. It was displayed in the courtroom, a silent, damning testament to my guilt. The prosecutor, a man with a flair for the dramatic, used it to paint a picture of a man who was so consumed by his art and his obsession that he could no longer distinguish between the two. I was found guilty, of course. The evidence was overwhelming. As the judge read the sentence, a lifetime in prison without the possibility of parole, I felt a strange, unexpected sense of relief. The crushing weight of my secret, a burden I had carried for so long, had finally been lifted. I am an old man now. My hands, which once held a brush with such precision and passion, are now gnarled and frail. I spend my days in a small gray cell, a world devoid of color and beauty. But even here, in this sterile, soulless place, I am not alone. She is with me. Her face, her voice, her memory, they are the ghosts that haunt my waking hours and my dreams. They say that The Crimson Muse is now considered one of the most important works of the 21st century. It hangs in a museum under carefully controlled lighting for all the world to see. People come from all over to gaze upon it, to whisper about the tragic, sordid story behind its creation. They see a masterpiece born from a dark and twisted love. But I see something more. I see my final, desperate attempt to hold on to the woman I loved, the woman I destroyed. I see my silent confession, a confession that was ultimately heard, not by the world, but by the echoes of my own shattered soul. And in the quiet, suffocating solitude of my cell, I am still the artist, and she is still my muse. My Crimson Muse, forever.